was not only the fact that it's totally factual and has to prove, but they actually found that the pegs that were holding things together were comprised of a titanium alloy. You ready? Yeah. Okay, here he is again.
Oh, thank you, John. It's a great pleasure to be with you today. I hope you're all having a wonderful time. Nothing like variety. It's a good idea, isn't it?
Speak like this.
Like this? Okay, good. Now, before I start speaking, our technician's just getting everything ready. I'd like to give out something to everybody. Now, some of you come to the book table and you received a couple of sheets which gives you an overview of some of the material, some of the resources that I have available. And I'd like to make sure that everyone gets an opportunity to have a copy of that. So I wonder if we could have a couple of volunteers to disperse these out. Maybe 2 or 3 volunteers would like to come forward and just give these out to everyone. Any volunteers? Here's one, thank you. Thank you very much. And please, just take up a few and put them in twos separately. Thank you. And when you receive these are the materials which we do have on the book table. Plus, if you're not prepared to sort of get hold of anything today, that's fine. Our address, phone number, it's all there, and we'll still give you the seminar prices that are on these sheets. These are many of them greatly reduced. I want to give you a good bargain today because you put the effort in coming here. We want you to feel that everything happens here is worthwhile. So that's what we're doing today for you. Thank you. Now, Jonathan Ison has asked me if I would be able to speak on the search and discovery of Noah's Ark. And of course, there's a lot of different opinions about this thing. Some people say, hey, that's just a children's storybook fantasy. And we're all entitled to our views, aren't we? Others say, well, I'm not sure whether it's just a story that was told to have some kind of other meaning, mean something else, or whether it's real history. Well, now, as an archaeologist, I don't waste my time with fantasy. Archaeology is actually a physical science. It deals with things that you can see and touch, and in some cases even smell. And we deal with hard, solid facts that really don't need any kind of interpretation because facts are facts, and in common sense we've all got that, I hope. And we can work out what these facts really are telling us, can't we? So this afternoon we're just going to put a few pictures on and tell our story. Okay, we're not going to talk about this man whose ship is never coming in. We're going to bring a ship into you today. All right. Noah was a great businessman. He kept a limited company afloat while the rest of the world was in liquidation. Well, that's very timely with our financial question. Okay. Has Noah's Ark been found? We do this a lot. Okay. This is a picture from the Scottish magazine showing what would happen if a tsunami struck the coast of Scotland. Now, you all remember the tsunami that happened on Boxing Day just, 4 or 5 years ago, and the man who took this picture died. This was taken by a man who's now dead. Just a moment after he took it, he was drowned. The thing came right over the top, and later on his camera was found, and this picture was in it. We pulled in at the Turkish town of Devyazet in eastern Turkey about 6 o'clock at night and checked in at the little hotel on the left-hand side. And while one of my team members got all his gear out of his bag, I went across the road because I was hungry and I thought, well, we'll get something to eat. And across the street there was a big sign, supermarket. The shop was about as big as a bathroom. But as I got closer, I noticed 3 things in the window. 1, 2, 3. You know what those are? bullet holes. I suddenly thought, well, I think I'll go to the hotel, we're going to eat tomorrow. Okay. And there's the hotel. That night there was an attack on the hotel by the Turkish military, because this is a Kurdish area and the Kurds were rebelling. They wanted independence. And we got caught in this, and by morning 30 people were dead around the hotel. The area is the one that you see in eastern Turkey, where Iran puts its little finger up to the side of Turkey. We're just inside Turkey, just outside the border of Iran. It used to be called the Urartu Kingdom. That's where we get the name Ararat today. It was a kingdom, not a mountain. And this has misled a few people because they don't know that bit of history, but we'll come into that in a moment. In 1960, a NATO Air Force pilot took this picture. In fact, he took tens of thousands of pictures because they were scared during the Cold War that Russia might be putting missiles into the mountains, and so they wanted to see what was happening. And one man who examined this for NATO was Dr. Brandenberger of Ohio State University, and he was the world's leading expert on stereophotography, photogrammetry. And as he looked through each of these pictures, he suddenly saw this one. And he almost leapt out of his seat. He said, "Right, that's a boat up in the mountains." He said, "I know what when I see one, and I'm used to this kind of work. This has to be looked at." So an expedition took place a few months later. It was actually reported in Life magazine. And that's a close-up of it. It's a bit of the right shape, isn't it? And the expedition found the whole thing was in the ground. All that they could see was the shape, but there was nothing sticking up. And one bright spark said, "Well, look, we've got to find out what this is. Why don't we blast a hole in the side, see if anything comes out." Great archaeological practice. And out came, actually, some timber-shaped pieces of stone. And of course they couldn't accept the fact that timber can petrify quickly. And they said this must be just a freak of nature. Well, I have a friend over in Tasmania on the north coast near Burnie. He's a farmer. And he dug up his grandfather's fence posts that were put in less than 100 years earlier. And you know, every part of those posts that was in the ground had turned to stone. Petrification only requires a bit of pressure, heat, the right action and temperature and so on, and it can turn to stone. I've seen petrified hats from mines that miners here in New Zealand were using in the 1860s. They had to petrify. They've been in the mine was closed up, go to the mine, they come and petrified hats. Okay, now, this is James Irwin, the astronaut. And next to him is Ron Wyatt, an archaeologist. These two men became friends in the search for Noah's Ark. And Ron read the Life magazine story, and he thought, I'll go across there with my two sons, we'll check this thing out. Because Ron actually was a believer in the story of Noah's Ark in the book of Genesis, the biblical book of Genesis. And he said, if this thing is up in the mountains, what's it doing up there? It's such a huge object, I must go and examine it. Pretty rough country. And it's longer than a football field. Okay. And it's too big to excavate. Well, now what he did was, when he got there, he said, it's hopeless for me to decide what this is. It's in the ground, it's too big, it's going to take me a lifetime to dig it out, so that's useless. I believe in prayer, I'm going to pray. I'm going to get some of my friends together in Nashville, Tennessee, and we'll pray that if this is the ark, then something unexpected will happen and it will come out of the ground. Now that's quite a long shot, isn't it? Okay. So they began praying, and you wouldn't believe what happened. And now, what actually happened is that Turkey's history books all written. And this is what happened. On November the 25th, at 3 minutes to 11 in the morning, suddenly the sky became silver. what actually became silver a few minutes earlier. And people began telling each other, look at the sky, look at silver. Now, a grey sky like we've got today is not silver. This was shining like silver paper, right across the sky. And people got out of their houses, the children were let out of their schools to go out and have a look. Truck drivers stopped their trucks in the middle of the road and looked up. It was something no one had ever seen. This wasn't worth talking about. And when everybody was safely out of any danger inside buildings, at 3 minutes to 11 that morning, an earthquake struck and lifted this thing 20 feet out of the ground. Now, is that an answer to freedom? Oh, boy. And so then a team went right across to Turkey and they began to examine it with scientists. Scientists came across. There's some Kurdish people. They're lovely folk, very hospitable. Little Kurdish girl. Here's another one. 2 and 3. And the man who owned that piece of land was very upset. He said, this thing came up and ruined my field. Anyway, the expedition began. There you are before the earthquake, there you have it after the earthquake. You see? Okay. Now, somebody's going to say to me, how can a boat get up to 2,000 metres above sea level, 6,300 feet? A boat that's as big as a football field and longer. How? That's impossible, because how would you get enough water that high to get the boat up there? Well, let's just do a little bit of geography for a moment. There you have our world today. 70% water, 30% land. Okay. If you took all these seawater below sea level and you tip the land into it, you'd find that there's 18 times more sea volume than there is land volume. So if you had a cosmic disaster, it wouldn't take a lot of effort to get this whole thing covered over, and huge areas of water covering over huge areas of land, with land rising and sinking. If you're talking about a cosmic disaster here, not just a Auckland flood. And this is what Genesis talks about. Now, we'll continue. Another question, and I used to be a skeptic, believe me. I was one of the greatest skeptics. I'll tell you about that in a moment. And one question I'm still asked, and one question I used to ask is this. How can you get all the animals of the world into one boat? Well, if it was that big, it'd be a bit of a hard job, wouldn't it? That's the kind of pictures we have in Noah's Ark and children's picture books. But if you take the dimensions as given in the biblical book of Genesis, oh, by the way, you'd have a problem with some of these pictures, wouldn't you? Yeah. There's the comparison of the size. A boat 158 metres long, 3 decks, each deck being an acre, and that's 515 feet long, beside the average-sized house, double-decker bus, elephant, man and his dog. If you went home tonight and you saw something that big behind your house, it would make you think, wouldn't it? That's the size, that's the actual size of Noah's Ark according to the old records. So we're talking about a boat that's pretty big, aren't we? Okay. And you'd be able to fit the animals in. Now, I'll tell you what. Dr. Ernest Meyer is one of the world's leading taxonomists. He states that there are 1 million animal species. 90% of them are in the sea. 10% of them are land creatures, and that includes insects, amphibians, mammals, birds, and what's the other one? Reptiles. Sure. If you take the average of those 4 bigger types, forget the insects, the average size from the largest creature, that's the elephant, and the giraffes and so hippopotamus and so on, the largest creatures down to the smallest land creatures, the average size of the whole lot of them is the size of a house cat. Now, there are 20,000 species of such creatures, land creatures. 20,000 basic kinds. If you took 20,000 male and female, that's 40,000, house cats on board, because that's what the average would be, and put them onto the deck space of this vessel this size, they would only cover 40% of the deck space. 40% only. And that's not even putting them in coaches and stacking them in tiers. And so the question is not this. It should not be, how did Noah ever fit them all in? The real question should be, what did he do with the extra space he had left over? That's scientific reasoning. That makes sense. Thank you. Now, we're told that the world was pretty violent back there. In fact, there was probably a world war raging at the time of the flood, according to ancient records. There was violence, there was corruption. There was a great proliferation, an increase of population taking place, which was multiplying population just like today. There was high technology. They had an industrial revolution about 300 years before the flood, according to the book of Genesis. We had an industrial revolution about 300 years ago. Isn't that interesting? Look where we are today. So what kind of technology might they have had back there at the time of the flood? And if you're sceptical about ancient technology, friends, I invite you to take a look at my video, my DVD, which is about the secrets of the lost races, or the book Dead Men's Secrets. And that will show you 1,000 secrets of the ancient races that show that they were as advanced, in at least 60 ways, they were more advanced than we are today. So there was no problem with ancient technology. They could do this kind of vote. And not only that, I'm going to show you things about this structure that you're going to absolutely be astonished at as we get going. Thank you. Now, here we have the vessel under construction. And then we have the invitation to anybody who would believe there was a flood coming, and of course they moved and they said there's not enough water. Just like people do today, you couldn't cover the mountains. Of course, the mountains are much lower back there too, but we've got good geological evidence of that. This disaster did a lot of things which changed this world. And our world today is very different from the world a few thousand years ago before this disaster took place. Thank you. And so they were laughing their way along until the event began to worry them because the earth began to shake. Suddenly the earth was tilted on its axis. Suddenly things began to happen. And we believe that an outside force only was capable of doing this. The earth could not tip on its axis out of its own power. An outside force had to do it. And it was tipped at about 26.5 degrees and slowly been coming back to now 23.5. At that time, tremendous stresses under the earth were burst open. When the earth tipped on its axis, it actually buckled the crust of the earth, and the huge underground water basins began to build up under pressure, and suddenly something had to give. And it took about 8.5 minutes for a huge crack to come right around the planet. And other cracks opened up, like the Great African Root and these things. They all happened at that time. And suddenly, water was coming up out of the earth. The canopy, the great canopy, like is now around Venus and some other planets, it used to be around our planet too at that time, so that there was a uniform climate from pole to pole. There's a lot of geological evidence of that. And at this time, the canopy, which made the Earth's climate beautiful like a terrarium, was ruptured. And the canopy began to collapse. This was a water canopy above the atmosphere, which shielded the Earth from cosmic rays, which today are getting through and shortening light. And as the water burst out of the Earth, volcanoes burst out also. The whole Earth was in turmoil. And it was fire and water, but mainly water was building up at huge levels, coming out of the ground, coming down from the canopy, which took about 6 weeks to collapse. And not only that, but 80% of the gaseous matter of volcanoes is also water. So a huge amount of water that had not been around before was now causing chaos and havoc across the planet. And huge waves were sweeping from the north poles to the south. And forests were being uprooted, which would become coal eventually. And coal only takes 28 days to form, not millions of years. Thank you. The whole world became a maelstrom of activity which just terrorised the population. And they ran for their lives. And the waves chased into the inland of the continent. And people began climbing into the heights to get away, so did the animals. And those that were still in the inland area where this big boat was came rapping on the door, but it was too late. And we have geological evidence of hundreds, I'm going to say this now, I want you to listen very carefully. Around this world there are hundreds of thousands, not hundreds and thousands, hundreds of thousands of hilltops all over the world that are just great masses of bones. And the bones are all mixed up. Sea creatures, land creatures, man-made instruments, human artifacts, human beings, all mixed up. And friends, this was a terrifying event. And the waves are estimated to have been taller than the Empire State Building in New York. And today, geologists look at the layers and they try to interpret them through the eyes of evolution, which I think is a big mistake, instead of interpreting through the eyes of catastrophe. Because you have whales and sharks and fish mixed up with horses and cows and snakes and human beings and trees that could only have come from water destruction, couldn't it? There's no other explanation. You've told me, I'm not interested. Okay. And we're not told about this in the schools because there's an agenda they want to get across to us. And that agenda misses out the fact that there was a great interpret of the whole world at one particular time in history where sea animals and land animals were mixed up together. And continents and seas were churned up together. Today, we find all over the world, including New Zealand, down in Port Waikato, the same situation in other places have been found. And this one in France, where you've got the tree trunks rooted up, the branches stripped off them, the roots stripped off them, and they are vertically going through about 20 or 30 layers of coal. Each layer interspersed with sand or something as water-made. This could only have happened rapidly because these would not have survived millions of years waiting to get buried. It had to be quick burial, quick destruction, and the coalfields were being formed at this very same event. Here's one in New South Wales. My friend is standing just beside a log, rather a tree, that is vertical through 14 layers of coal. Each layer interspersed with water-made mud. And the record says that the whole world was inundated at this time. And when the flood, by the movements of the earth, because the earth was still convulsing and moving throughout all that period, and for hundreds of years later, the water actually settled down after about 12 or 13 months into new areas that had been opened up. This is a big subject, I'm just trying to answer. And the water actually left terraces as it started retreating. You can see terraces like this all around the world today, as it retreated off the land that it had just come. You can see these terraces. Every river today is an underfit stream. The water that flowed off the land was huge earlier, and now it's just back to normal, small. But at the time of the flowing off, that was the end of the flood. Here is a canyon near Mount St. Helena in USA that formed in one day. That canyon you're looking at is 200 feet deep, 200 feet wide, and formed in one day. When everything is soft and everything has been piled on top, and then water starts cutting down and cuts down very quickly. And eventually the survival vessel landed up in the mountains of what today we call Turkey. And they came out. This was after about 13 months of floating around. Today, the most widespread memory of the human race is the Great Flood. 600 or more legends. And for about 2,000 years after the event, tourists used to report going up to visit the remains and taking souvenirs from the big boat. The Persians talk about this, the Phoenicians talk about it. Many ancient histories speak of tourists going up to the area and souveniring bits of Noah's Ark. When Ron Wyatt came back to America and said, I believe this is Noah's Ark, Nashville Chronicle put him on the front page and gave a very good report on it. But then the skeptics came out. As you'd expect, I was one of those. I'd read about supposed remains of a boat on top of Mount Ararat, 16,000 feet, 5,000 metres. And when Ron Wyatt said, no, this is what we've found is about 20 kilometres to the south on these other mountains, I didn't want to believe him. I said, hey, wait a minute, you're not even in the right location. But I forgot this one thing, that the record did not say Mount Ararat, it said the mountains of Ararat is where it landed, not Mount Ararat. And people who go up to Mount Ararat looking for Noah's Ark are never going to find it. Because Mount Ararat is a post-flood mountain that came up about 1,000 years after the flood as a volcano. It's come up since that event. But the mountains to the south answer the description perfectly. And this is where we find this boat shape. And now we're going to have a look at some scientific stuff. Well, I was one of the skeptics. I drew all the money out of my bank account. I think I had about $30,000 at that time. And I drew it all out and I said, I'm going to prove this man wrong. I took my own scientists, we went across, in fact we interrogated the man mercilessly himself, but he had the answers right. He had laboratory tests to show us, he had all sorts of things that we never thought were possible. And so I said, okay, I'm going over there myself, we're going to check this thing, we're going to prove it or disprove it. And of course, you've got to be honest about this, but if I'm mistaken, I don't mind admitting it. We all make mistakes. Nothing to be ashamed of. Well, I made a mistake. I was wrong. We found things there I never thought we'd find. Here is an anchor stone. One of the things that actually struck me was the fact that in a curve leading up to where this boat shape was, there were all these anchor stones that had been dropped on top of hills. Whatever were anchor stones from ancient shipping doing on top of hills in a line leading up to a boat shape? That really got me worried. But these ones were huge. These were in proportion to what a big boat would use and not a small boat. And they used to drag these, all ancient shipping used to use them. They used to drag in the water to stabilise a boat so that they would not go sideways against the wave and tip over. And this was a constant thing. They had a hole going right through the stone, and the diameter of the hole in the interior was wider than the openings on either side. In other words, this was the kind of hole that you'd expect to have a knot tied that would stay secure and not choke during the violence of the storm. Here's a Turkish diver who's found 3 of these on the seabed near an old shipwreck. This is the kind of thing they used to use. There you have the boat shape again. There you have it from the air. And one of my arguments was, well, look, this whole shape must have been formed by nature. Where mud flowing around an obstacle that would leave that kind of shape. Well, the problem with that theory is that the boat shape, pointed one, is uphill, whereas nature does it the other way. The pointed part is downhill. As the object flows around like a light bulb at the top, it comes back to a point at the bottom later. That's how nature does it, but man-made structure does it the other way around. Okay. Dave Vessel, marine salvage expert, joined the team. Dave had a lot of equipment. He used to salvage shipwrecks around the world. And Dave brought in his equipment. And he brought in his 3 types of metal detector, so that if one gave a false reading or a vague reading, the other two could confirm or cancel it. And there was a metal pattern right through the structure. And the metal pattern actually was in straight lines with other lines crossing like a lattice work. And where these joined, there were found to be 4,300 metal sections at all the intersections where these lines were. They put down yellow ribbons to indicate where the lines were found, and you can see them lining them out there. Very, very straight. Something you do not get in nature, and only inside the boat shape, but not outside the boat shape. There was no metal lines outside the shape, only inside. And there, halfway down on one side, there was a bending where the metal lines are bent together. You see them up there at the top of the picture. It's almost like it's almost the same as when you get a motor car, you drive it along, it hits a power pole, everything, all the straight lines are bent and put together. And this is what had happened because there was a great rock there on the side. Now this could only happen with a structure that was foreign to the area. Either the rock or the boat shape were foreign to the location. And the rock actually was part of the ground, so the boat shape had to be a foreign body. It was not part of the landscape. And here you have some of the circles, all in groups of 7. There were 7 here, 7 here, 7 here, 7 here, all these circles. And samples were taken of these, they were taken to a laboratory, and they were found to be metal rivets. Rivets which actually contained iron, titanium, aluminium, and space-age minerals that would make the iron stronger. And when NASA heard about this, they said, this kind of structure must be, it can't be a boat, it has to be a Russian satellite that's come down, and we'll be going out to see if we can get samples of this space-age metal, titanium, which has only been used in the last 100 years by our technology. We couldn't do it before then. But here it was in these rivets. Well, NASA were shaking their heads because it was only inside the boat shape and nowhere else on any of those mountains. They said this has to be an ancient technology. Okay. And then as we continued the work, as the erosion came now, because the thing was out of the ground, it was now open to erosion, the superfluous material got eroded away and left ribs like the ribs of a boat, all the way round. And you can see them. And there was a lattice work around the sides as well. Certainly this was a man-made structure, no doubt whatsoever about it. That's what the structure was fashioned on. And there were rib timbers, deck joists, deck support timbers, facing each other on both sides. The middle had collapsed because of the weight of rubble on the top of it. But the pieces sticking out were facing each other like this, all the way down. Then radar came in. And the radar showed that underneath the structure, because there was still mud on top, because it had been buried, inside the structure there was a passageway which went for about 60.2% of the distance from back to the centre. And both sides of that, there were cavities at regular intervals, cavities such as you would have put animals and so on in. And nearly in the front of it, you can see how the deck structure had collapsed. And you can see where there's where the centrepiece on the left-hand side is like a passageway. In the front there was a big doorway on the side, about 2.5 metres high, and also in front of that there were 2 tank-shaped structures with metal bands around them. When this was all fed into a computer, the computer started bringing up a show of what this basic shape was. And it showed that their collapse had taken place, but the pattern structure was there, even though it had collapsed downward. That would have been what it looked like. Pretty modern, eh? One of our team members built a model of it. He was a man who flew through the aircraft for a lot of the Pan Am flights. He was an aircraft pilot. He was also an engineer, and he built models of this. At the back there were some protrusions which nobody understood what they were, but in an audience I was giving in London, a man came up, he was a sea captain, he said, those protrusions would help to stabilise the vessel. So now we can understand what they were there for. You can see where the doorway is. It's not halfway down as picture books show, it's near the front. Now, if you can skip through this, I'm not going to talk about the book table, you know it's there. Now we just go back one, thank you. Before that. There's the location, 39 degrees 26, and that's north of the equator. That map has shown another story, but I just wanted to show you that this is a long way inland. It's hundreds of kilometres inland from the Mediterranean Sea, and it's 6,000 feet above sea level, 2,000 metres altitude. So what's a boat doing there? Well, if I was trying to be a wise man, I'd say somebody must have carried it up on his back. But no, friends, we're not going to get away with that kind of funny bit story, because you just don't get a boat up in the mountains unless water has brought it there, especially if it has a weight of 32,000 tonnes. Okay, so that means that water was at least 6,000 feet above sea level at one time when a boat was brought to land. Now, does water stay up this high here and drop down here beside it? No, water finds its own level, doesn't it? If water is 2,000 metres above sea level, it's going to be 2,000 metres above sea level all over, isn't it? That we're talking about an event that staggers the imagination, friends, and we've had land movement since, and this is, I've dealt a lot about this in some of my books and the videos, very fascinating subject. This, friends, is a boat that was brought there by water, a boat weighing 32,000 tonnes. And there is the Bible dimensions, 515 feet, 158 metres. It doesn't use feet and metres, it uses the word cubits. Now, Moses, who wrote this record, was born in what country? Those of you who know something about Moses, what country was he from? Who saw the Hollywood movie on Egypt? Egypt, that's right. Moses was also trained in the royal house of Egypt before he made his escape. And Moses was familiar with the royal Egyptian cubit, and the royal Egyptian cubit was 20.6 inches. He wrote that the ark was 300 cubits, 300 times 20.6 is 515 feet, 158 metres. That's how we get the historical dimension of it. Thank you. And our boat shape in Turkey is exactly 515.5 feet. How about that? 300 cubits, exactly as it's written in the book of Genesis, precisely in the right location, the right length, the right average beam width. Does that start coming together? Okay. There is one of the Egyptian cubit rulers, which is now in the Cairo Museum. You can test the length of it. It's 20.6 inches. We've done a few excavations in Jerusalem, and in Jerusalem, this is the kind of thing you see a lot. Dear little boys selling from their lovely hot arms the labels which taste so nice. Now, we've examined tombs in Jerusalem, and we found it also to be based on the old cubit of 20.6 inches. Interesting. So we've got our measurements here. Now, the record says that Noah, toward the end of the flood, was getting impatient to get out, so he sent some birds to fly around and see if they could find a resting place, and if they did, he'd know it was getting time, they'd soon be able to get out. And several flights of birds went back and forth for several weeks, and the crow that he sent out could not find a resting place, so she came back to the yard and no one knew there was no room, there was no land appearing that would satisfy a bird so it would come back. So, okay, they stayed a bit longer. Now, there's a village. Here's our boat shape up there on the left. You see that little boat shape thing on the left? That's where it is. 2 kilometres to the east is that star, and that's a village called, and it's been called this for thousands of years, where the crow cannot land. And all those other white spots are place names. Now, archaeologists actually find it very helpful to look at place names as a guide to history. And I know many of you come from different parts of New Zealand, and in your own local area there are place names, either Pākehā or Maori, which talk about an event or commemorate an event of the early days. Is that right? How many of you know that? Yeah, right. If you want to know about an event in the past over here, look at the place names. And all those place names are commemorating the event of the landing of the ark. And they've been there for thousands of years. Only to be discovered now. In fact, there's a village just up there on the top of the picture. There's Big Mount Ararat there on the very top near the right. There's a village called the Place of Eight. The valley is called the Valley of Eight. You know, the book of Genesis says there were 8 human beings on the oak. Did you know that? Then there's another place here, Veroni, in the middle of the picture, just up a bit where the oars were reversed. Now that's not saying that Noah's Ark had oars, but that's a simplistic way of saying, I mean, when you're in a boat, a rowing boat, and you reverse your oars, you come to slow down. In other words, this is where the boat slowed down coming into land. History, isn't it? The place names. That's the location, and that's where the boat shape is. Thank you. There's the mountain that says where the oars were reversed. In other words, the water was over the mountain here when they was coming into land. There's only one boat in history that was coming into over the mountains. Now, another thing that is helpful is to look at the ancient records. And archaeology is greatly assisted by ancient writings. Now, the book of Genesis says, now the ancient writings are in the left-hand column. What the archaeologists have found is in the right-hand column. The book of Genesis says it landed in the Ararat region. Our discovery is in the Ararat region. The book of Genesis says it landed on the mountains, plural. Not on a mountain, but on the mountains. And it is on a mountain range. Local legend says it's on a hill, not a tall mountain. Well, friends, a 6,000 foot elevation against the 16,000 foot one is a hill. It's on one of the lower levels, not a tall mountain. The local tradition also says, in fact, the Muslims have a tradition which they say it's on the mountain, it's going to be found on the mountain called Al-Judi. Well, friends, it is on the mountain called Al-Judi. That's a local name for that mountain. Legends of the past say it's on the west side of the hill, and this is from ancient tourist visits. Thousands of years ago, the tourists said it's on the west side of the hill. We've found it to be on the west side of the hill. They said it was beside a large rock, and you've seen that rock in the picture, haven't you? It's at a place called Nisr. Well, friends, on old maps of this area, there's a village 300 metres up the hill behind it, and on old maps that village is called Nisr. Old legends say it's on a north-south axis. We've found it by measurement to be aligned on 10 degrees north-south.
Had Ron demonstrate the radar. When he found what looked like a broken timber near the surface, the governor had it dug up and gave it to Ron to be verified. The lab test revealed organic carbon. It was petrified wood. But the final proof was when it was sectioned. The evidence was obvious. Not only could the internal wood structure be seen, it was also clearly laminated wood. 3 separate layers could be seen. The adhesive material, or glue, had seeped out and hardened on one end and was perfectly aligned with the internal layers. But the ultimate test as to whether this was indeed once wood was to determine the presence of organic carbon. Galbraith Labs took samples of the timber. They first analyzed for total carbon content, both organic and inorganic combined. The next test was for only inorganic carbon. By comparing the two results, we would know if organic carbon were present.
We're in the process of weighing the sample now before the analysis for the total carbon from this sample. The inorganic carbon will be included in this determination, all the carbon that's present. As we run the inorganic carbon, we'll be able to tell the difference if there's any organic present in the material. You're getting 0.71% total carbon in this.
0.71.
Present time we weigh about 500 milligrams of sample for a carbonate determination. That would be the inorganic carbon in the sample.
Right.
81 ppms inorganic carbon.
Okay, thank you very much.
Inorganic carbon equaled 81 ppms, or parts per million. This equals 0.0081%. The result, 0.71% total carbon less 0.0081% inorganic carbon leaves 0.7019 organic carbon. This indeed shows that this specimen did once consist of living matter. Another exciting evidence came in June of 1991. In the presence of 26 witnesses, Ron found a fossilized rivet.
Our last trip out there this past June, we found this very impressive rivet. And if you'll notice here, the plate itself is just a little more than 1/4 of an inch in thickness. It's approximately 3.5 inches in diameter, the plate itself, and then the shaft of the rivet is roughly 1 inch to 1.25 inches in diameter. And if you'll notice here, it was struck while it was hot and flared out the end of the shaft so that it would not slide back through the hole in this washer. And this shows that their abilities to use metal was quite advanced, quite sophisticated, and folks, there are thousands of these rivets on this boat. In fact, at every joint where the wooden structures are held together, they're held together by large metal plates which are predominantly iron, and then these rivets.
Aluminum, iron, titanium, and other metals present sufficient evidence of a most sophisticated alloy. There are other specimens which also are consistent with what we would expect to find on Noah's Ark. One is a petrified section of a broken antler. Greg Brewer of Dixon, Tennessee, found this embedded in the Ark in August of 1989. Since it consists of the base of the antler, it can be positively identified by visual inspection. As antlered animals shed these antlers once a year, this shows that at some point in time, an animal with antlers lost them on the Ark. There is also a large quantity of coprolites in the areas where the Ark has deteriorated and broken away. These are, simply put, petrified animal droppings. Many of the evidences alone are convincing, such as the length. The petrified deck timber of laminated wood is the only specimen found to date of its type anywhere on this planet. Never has hand-hewn petrified wood been found, much less laminated. And the list goes on even beyond what we've examined here. but all of the evidences combined are overwhelming.
We're delighted with the results, and at this point in time, personally, I can look anybody in the eye and say that this boat-shaped formation in eastern Turkey is actually the remains of Noah's Ark.
This is a good opportunity for anyone who's got a question they'd like to ask me right now. How about we make use of this 5 minutes, eh? This gentleman first.
Where did all the people come from to bang on the door?
Where did the people come from that banged on the door? They were a local population who didn't believe there was going to be a flood.
No, didn't you say after the flood?
During, just as it was coming on. Yeah. The people who banged on the door first, during the event?
Yeah, didn't you say after the flood?
No.
Okay.
No. We saw a door in the side after the flood. Yeah. Yes.
You said that only an external force could actually tilt the Earth to the degree that it was. What hypotheses have you come up with so far to explain that?
The most reasonable hypothesis that's come up by scientists as to what caused the tilting of the Earth's axis was that natural force could very well have been an ice comet coming close, because when we see evidence, there's other evidence which does suggest it was an ice comet, but that may not necessarily have been the cause. It was something close that came close to the Earth and caused enough attraction to tip it over.
Can you tell us what carnivores were fed on, please?
What? Oh, well, yeah. Actually, an interesting thing. Survival food is mentioned in the book of Genesis, that survival food was taken on board. However, scientists also tell us that in time of great stress, both birds and animals are capable of going into hibernation, in which case the metabolism slows down and very little food is needed there anymore. Yes?
What sort of timber was the ark made of?
Pardon?
What sort of timber?
What sort of timber, we don't know. The book of Genesis does say gopher wood, but gopher wood is a Hebrew word meaning 3-ply, laminated, which would make the timber stronger. 3 layers of timber together are stronger than 1 layer of the same thickness. Yes?
Wouldn't the spare space in the ark that you were talking about, saying that all those animals only took up 40% of the space, wouldn't the rest of it sort of account for food storage?
It could account for food storage, and of course, if they were not all hibernating, they're capable of doing it, but if this did not happen that way, and they were still awake, a lot of them, and they needed to be fed, we know that they have very advanced technology. It could have been done with an automated system, and they would not have to go around all these 20,000 pairs of animals. Yes? The timing of the flood is actually recorded in the history of many nations, and as close as we can get, can you hear me?
No.
It was the 1st of November, and it was recorded around about either the 1st of November or the 31st of October, 2345 BC, for 13 months. And that can be very well confirmed, and there are about 10 different timing factors that we can go to. The oldest deserts are 4,500 years old. That was confirmed by German scientists last year. Oh well, that's uncensored. We can speak freely today, can't we? As a matter of fact, I was talking to Jonathan Ison on the phone last night, and he said, well, we're going to have this university all day tomorrow. And I was tempted to say back to him, well, this will probably be the only uncensored university that we have in the world. Okay. Back to the slides. All right, friends, we've found lots of evidences ourselves since then as well. There have been metal rods found. The Turkish government actually has confiscated some of these. We've got friends in the Turkish departments who've been working with us, and they want to keep some of these. They're very precious. I I would suggest to you today that any further searches for Noah's Ark would be fruitless. The old vessel, what's left of it, has now been found. This is a gentleman, he's an atheist, he's a well-renowned archaeologist. His name is Dr. Akram Archegul. He died a while ago. Dr. Archegul actually was shown the evidence, and he was asked, what does this mean? And Dr. Archegul said without any hesitation, he says, this is a boat. This is a boat, it must be preserved. And then on television he was asked another question, well, if this is a boat, what's it doing up there 6,000 feet in the mountains, hundreds of kilometres away from the sea? And his answer was, there's only one answer to this. This has to be Noah's Ark. And various other learned people in Turkey who have been working very closely with this. The Turkish government set up what they call the Noah's Ark Commission. And on that is Dr. Salih Bourgutin, a Muslim man. And he has been helping us a lot with our work. And he actually is a university professor. And he did an update on his doctorate. And when he went before the panel of his peers to be tested orally about his doctorate, they said, well, you come through with almost 100%. But we have only one final question for you. Do you believe that boat up there in the mountains is Noah's Ark? And he said, yes, emphatically I do. And they said, well, sorry, we cannot employ you any longer. That was the Uncensored University in Eastern Turkey. That's the kind of censure that goes on everywhere today. And that's why the public is being brainwashed, the fact that some of these Bible stories are only fantasy because it's all the truth. The evidence is being censored. Okay. Today we are uncensored. Here is what the Turkish government has been pulling out of the structure. Now, when I looked in secrets, I'm only saying this because I want you to know that there is good evidence of high technology in the past. And a lot of this technology exceeds the knowledge that we have today. And this means that such a boat could scientifically have existed in the past because the technology was there to do it. Now, the Turkish government has now put out a tourist map. I picked this one up in Istanbul when I was on my way to Europe. And you'll see that they have the town that devises it. That's where we got shot up in the hotel. And right next to that, we've got the big boat, the Noah's Ark. That's right there on the map. Because this town is only half an hour's drive from the excavation site. I'll enlarge the map on the right now in the next picture. And they call, there's the bias there in the centre left of the picture, there's the roadway, and then underneath that, those little green things are called historic, they're a sign for a historical site. And so here we have it, and it's called Nuhan Gemisi, historical site. Gemisi means a big boat, Nuhan means belonging to Noah. Noah's big boat, recognised by the Turkish government. And so they built a visitor centre there on the left, so people can come all over the world and have a look at it. There is a sign to Nuhan Gemisi, that's a side road going up. There have been ideas to place a big dome over it so that a further excavation can take place, but the Turkish government has banned any further excavation because they say it's only destroying the structure, and before it continues there must be a big dome. But unfortunately it cost about $16 million. Someone's got $16 million you'd like to give me today, wouldn't you?
Ask the Vatican.
Yeah, I think they've got more than they need. All right. Now just up behind it, we've discovered a border marker. This is right on the border with Iran, because as the hill goes up behind the big boat, there is a mountain range just about 300 metres higher up and 2 kilometres back. In other words, you go up like this and you climb that much, and then you're sitting on the border looking over into Iran. Now, we believe that the structure actually landed higher up on that level. I'll tell you why in a moment, and then it came down to where it is now. This monument is 4,000 years old. This monument was put up within about 300 or 400 years after the event. And it portrays where the boat was at that time. Let me bring it up closer for you. It is showing the boat with 8 people in it, a man and a woman, and 3 men and 3 women. The book of Genesis says Noah and his wife and their 3 sons, Shem, Ham and Japheth, and their wives. From Shem we get the Semites, that are the Jews and the Arabs. From Japheth we get the Indo-European races. And from Ham we get the African races, the Melanesians and so on. Now, it's interesting that, and I've got a special DVD on that one, I think it's called, doesn't matter, it's out there. All races today are able to trace their ancestry back to that event. I've got this very carefully documented, both in book and DVD. Chinese tribes trace themselves back to Japheth. Hamitic tribes in the Congo trace themselves back to Ham. In Libya, tribes trace themselves back to Shem. In India, tribes trace themselves back to Japheth. In Greece, tribes trace themselves back to Japheth. The Irish royal family, the British royal family, the Norwegian royal family, the Danish royal family, and the Iceland royal family all trace themselves back to Japheth, son of Noah. And these genealogies are unbroken, coming down through more than 30 generations to today. And these tribes had no contact with each other. They didn't know about each other for a long, good part of history. But they all trace themselves back to Noah. Which means that all branches of the human race have preserved genealogies which go back to Noah. Isn't that interesting? And the question of differences in appearance is a minor matter genetically, and it can be explained as occurring very quickly. We're all related back to Noah, according to those genealogies. And according to geneticists who have studied it very carefully. Now, I want you to notice this. We've got a hammock-shaped mountain, see it? On the left. Then we've got a little mountain, then we've got a big one, which is actually a volcano. We've got 2 birds flying. The book of Genesis talks about the crow and the dove that were sent out. Now, I want you to compare this with the landscape as it is today. This is on that old 4,000-year monument. And it's right up the top of the hill, way behind the shape, on the border with Iran. Now, let's look closely and compare this picture, this 4,000-year-old picture, with the modern landscape today. See if we can identify it. You see the limestone ridge, the hammock-shaped mountain there? And then you'll see a small mountain here. That's that one. Now, this volcano is just over here. But today it's got a crater in it, showing that it erupted and sent out a mud lava flow, and we presume it was the mud lava flow which pushed down the vessel to where it is today, and that it collided with that rock which was part of the landscape, and that's why you've got the iron lines dented together when it got impaled on that rock, and it's been there ever since. And then it got cut over. And it's interesting that Persian tourists around about 800 years BC describe how when they went to visit Noah's Ark, 800 BC, they had to go down into it to explore it. You only go down into something if you're on ground level, if what you're going down into is buried. Would that be right? Makes sense? And so the mud flow brought it down and kept on flowing and buried it over. And not until the earthquake of 1978 did it come up from being buried and could then be examined. And so there it is. Now this old statement, 2,000 years old, mentions it. It says, as it was in the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. For as in the days that were before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered into the ark, and knew not until the flood came and took them all away. So shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. That's talking about the second coming. Jesus Christ is speaking of himself there. And he says it's going to be like that again. There's going to be a world population increase. There's going to be a high technology, just like Noah's day. There's going to be increasing crime, an increase in violence, and there's going to be world wars, exactly like in Noah's day. But people are still going to be getting married, they're still going to be building their houses, they're still going to be doing everything, and suddenly there's going to come a sudden interruption to everything. That's what that's all about. And it's interesting, when you compare Noah's day with our day, it's pretty right. Oh no, there's no corruption anymore, is there? No violence. Okay. Talking about population increase, just outside Tokyo, there's a beach. And people go there to get away from it all. And a helicopter flies over the beach with a loudspeaker, and what the man said is this: don't be selfish, sit up, make room for somebody. That's a fact. Okay, the event came suddenly, it was unexpected. Some people did not prepare for it, some people did. Let me tell you, friends, we're about to enter a great financial crisis in the world at the moment. I'm not talking about the final end of things, I'm talking about the financial crisis such as never was ever in history before. The economists are telling us this. And some people will prepare for it and survive it. Others will not. And they won't. Human nature doesn't change. But then, of course, there's coming a greater trouble after that. And some will survive it and some will not. You know, what the wise will always prepare, won't they? And so the big question is, what's coming? How do I prepare for it? Well, that information is available. But I think we've finished our time. And we're going to have a break, I think, and then Uncensored is coming on with some interesting information about the New World Order. Okay, thank you, John.